China appears to have moved fairly quickly to take advantage of mass layoffs of federal workers since President Trump took office, recruiting those workers. A lot to this story here, so I do want to bring in Max Lesser, senior analyst on emerging threats at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies Center on Cyber and Technology Innovation. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us this morning.
Thank you.
Of course. Well, first off, can you kind of break down this whole situation, what we've seen, and how it's happening?
Yeah, so these operations have been happening for a long time. Actually, one of the most significant operations that was exposed was exposed in 2018 when a Singaporean national named Dixon Yeo attempted to recruit various government personnel through LinkedIn. And what we found at FDD was just sort of the latest instantiation of this, and specifically was leveraging the mass layoffs of federal employees to try to recruit people who obviously are in a vulnerable situation after unexpectedly losing their jobs.
What is the goal by recruiting these workers who have been laid off, who worked maybe with the U.S. government? What is the overall goal there?
Yeah, so gaining access to sensitive or otherwise non-public information is obviously the ultimate goal. And oftentimes what we see in these operations is they'll start just by asking sort of for benign requests. Let's say they want somebody to give their analysis of a current event. And then they'll just, as the relationship develops, they'll escalate and they'll escalate. As they build trust, they will ask for increasingly sensitive information. That could just be non-public information, for example, the personality of a high-level government official. And then eventually they might escalate to where they're asking for actually classified and controlled information of various kinds. And that's a pattern that we see again and again in these operations.
What sort of methods are they using? You mentioned LinkedIn. I'm sure there's Craigslist. Can you talk about the different methods that are being used?
Yeah, I love that you mentioned Craigslist, Josh, because that's something we found in the operation we exposed that maybe people wouldn't suspect at first. So there's two primary behaviors, two primary techniques that we see associated with these operations. The first is they very often use geopolitical risk consulting for cover. So operatives might pose as geopolitical risk consultants or clients of geopolitical risk consulting firms. And then they'll also create fake geopolitical risk consulting firms to sort of lend the illusion of credibility to their various job listings and outreach. And we saw that in the operation we discovered, where we saw 4 different fake geopolitical risk consulting firms that were being used to sort of construct these false entities. And that's the first big technique. And then the second one, as you mentioned, involves using various online platforms. So LinkedIn is a classic one, but we also saw a lot of other platforms, some of which weren't even explicitly job platforms, like Craigslist is just an online classifieds platform. You see people obviously advertising everything from couches to home improvement there. But we also saw them using smaller niche professional networking sites like TLHQ, BB, different platforms that maybe not a lot of people have even heard of. And I just think it goes to show how vast, how many different vectors of attack they have to sort of get at potential recruits.
And I have to ask, for folks who are watching right now who maybe did work for the government at some point, whether they were laid off or just don't work there anymore, how do they distinguish between what is a legitimate post there about a job versus one that is not and could have been posted by a foreign government, including the Chinese government?
That's a great question, Josh. And honestly, it's not always obvious, right? I had to look underneath the hood of these various websites to discover their connections to China. The first thing I would say for somebody who maybe doesn't have a background in technical investigations, the first thing I would say is just ask people in your networks. Ask them, have you ever heard of this? Maybe you know people in your professional network who have expertise that aligns with the organization that's trying to recruit you. Have you ever heard of this? Look them up, see if there are any external references to the company, and just get a sense at first, is this a known organization? But then other things, if you're savvy, if you want to do a little bit of an investigation, look at the corporate officers. Try and see if you can find them on LinkedIn. Do they look like real people or not? Look at the client list. do these look like real clients or not? One of the initial leads we found for our investigation, they listed all fake clients. And if you were to look up the names of the different companies they were listing as clients, you would see that they're clearly not real organizations. So there's various things that you can do to kind of look under the hood or discover connections between a website and China. But I would say for somebody who's not experienced in investigations, just ask people in your professional network, vet something before you apply. I know it's difficult and people are very urgently looking for jobs, but don't apply for a company unless you know that it's legit.
My last question for you here, and this is kind of a tough one, but just based on your expertise, what does the U.S. government need to do to overcome this? Because that's a huge national security risk if you have U.S. government employees who do at some point provide information to a foreign government like China. So what does the U.S. government need to be doing right now as this information comes out?
Yeah, Josh, that's a great question. And I think I just want to highlight something first, which is that just in late April, an Army intelligence analyst was sentenced by the DOJ for giving sensitive military information to somebody who was working on behalf of the Chinese government. And this person, we saw all of the exact same behaviors in this operation. We saw the person who was working for the PRC, he used geopolitical risk consulting as cover. He reached out to the intelligence analyst over an online professional platform. So these have real consequences. These have real consequences, and we can see that with that sentencing just from April. And what I would say is that the US government, obviously, they should, at a highest level, they should do more to impose costs on China for this behavior, right? So they need to make it more costly for China to engage in this behavior because it's so easy right now. They can create these fake companies, they can reach out to people. There are really no consequences. So that is the most important thing they can do. Make it harder for China to launch these operations, make it more costly.
And I thought of one more question here before I let you go. Anything about all of this that did surprise you? Anything you haven't mentioned yet that stood out to you as all of this research was underway and the findings started coming in?
Yeah, so I think what's unique about the operation that FDD discovered is that you were seeing companies that actually were presenting themselves as being in the United States. And that's a little bit of a variance from previous operations. In a lot of previous operations, these fake companies were presenting themselves as being in Singapore or Hong Kong. And that makes sense, right? Because both countries have, or both regions have majority ethnic Chinese populations. But here we were seeing them create companies in the United States, and actually they had legal entities registered for several of these companies. So it just goes to show how they're becoming more sophisticated and they're making it harder. Let's say somebody was applying for one of these jobs and they saw that there was a legal entity that was registered. They might, say, hey, this looks like a legitimate company. So people need to keep their guard up. Again, that's why I really suggest just vetting an organization before you apply. Reach out to people in your network, see if people have ever heard about it before. And if something seems really suspicious, potentially report it to law enforcement to see if they can assist you.
All right, Max Lesser, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and help obviously discuss a topic that a lot of people haven't necessarily heard about, so we definitely appreciate it. Is there anything else that you want to add specifically that you want to make sure folks who are at home watching this kind of take in, especially when you talk about, U.S. government employees, whether they were laid off or left their position?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll end with this final point. So I remember I sort of came of age alongside the internet. And I remember when I was young, people were skeptical of even just putting their credit card on a website. And there was, less trust in internet. And now I think understandably, people have come to be a lot more trusting. We do commerce online all the time. We give our information online all the time, and we have to just operate in modern society. But maybe it's good for people to be a little bit more skeptical of things they see online, especially if you're applying for a job. You're giving a lot of sensitive information about yourself, PII, personally identifiable information. And so just make sure before you send your resume somewhere, even if it's just a quick, easy apply in LinkedIn, make sure you know that it's a legitimate website, because otherwise you could potentially be handing your resume over to a foreign adversary.
Definitely something a lot of people don't think about. Max, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and breaking it all down. We appreciate it.